Guys, how's it going? It's Luke back again for another golf preview, but this time it's for the Olympics. We have a very unique week this week. We get to cheer on Team USA, whatever country you guys are supporting. We get a lot of national pride involved, a lot of the greatest golfers on a very, very historic course. Overall, I'm very excited for this week. I'll be cheering on Team USA, and we also have some great DraftKings contests as well. Not only do we have a stacked field, we have a lot of the top 20 in the world, a lot of players that we haven't seen before from some of the smaller countries, but we really get a lot of nice storylines coming into the event as well. One of the more interesting storylines for this year's Olympics is for the South Koreans. Siwoo Kim and Sun Jae-in will be representing them, but they have a lot on their mind for this year's tournament. In South Korea, if you guys are not familiar, they do have mandatory military service for all of their males in their country. It does not matter who they are. It doesn't matter if they're a celebrity, a very famous athlete like these two are. You are entitled and you are required to go into the military for 2 years. The only way to get out of that responsibility is to win a medal in the Olympics. That gives you an exemption. You're required to go into the next Olympics, obviously, and compete. But both of those men, Sunjae and Siwoo, will be unbelievably pressured this week to do so. Obviously, it'll change their entire life if they don't make it into the medalist spot and end up going into the military. So I'll be rooting for them this week to at least finish like third place or something like that. When we take a look at some of the other storylines, we had Bryson DeChambeau and Jon Rahm both test positive for COVID. Unfortunately, neither one will be competing in the Olympics. No need to worry for the America, though. We do have Captain America coming to the rescue, Patrick Reed, one of my favorite players in the world, so I'm going to love seeing him tee it up. But I really do like Bryson as well, so it's a little bit unfortunate there. But overall, we do have some great DraftKings contests this week. There are multiple GPPs. We have a 200K to first, a 100K to first, a 50K to first single entry, and the usual slate of contests as well. So you're going to get a lot of casuals playing, supporting their countries, whether it's Team USA, some of the internationals or whatnot. And I think there's going to be a lot of money to be made this week. While I obviously want to go out, I want to cheer for the Team USA, you can't necessarily do so if you're putting your money behind that. I think there's going to be a lot of bias this week, a lot of national pride that's put into their own lineups. You're going to see people that pay like all three, or actually I don't think you can play all four US guys in a lineup. They're just priced too high. But like 2 or 3 of them in a lineup, and then, mixing some of the South Korean guys because they're rooting for them. While that seems fun, that's something that I would do if I was putting like a dollar entry or something like that. You shouldn't be doing that with all 150 lineups or when you're putting in thousands of dollars or anything like that. So I think there's going to be an edge this week, especially with the casuals as well. And if you guys are new to my videos, in this video we're going to be previewing the course for this week, which is going to be in Japan. We're also going to be covering some of the tournament details, some of the field notables. We'll go through a couple more of those, and we're also going to be going over my top 3 key metrics for my analysis this week. I use a custom modeling technique that I use for all of my DFS sports. I don't just cover the PGA Tour, but with the PGA Tour, I use a combination of historical form and recent form. I also try to characterize golf courses and assign player profiles to them as well. So I try to find the best course fit. I also factor a lot of other factors into my model as well. It's very extensive. It's about 50 or 60 factors at this point. And I use a lot of the knowledge that I've picked up as an electrical engineer to help take on that type of analysis. So if you're looking for even more database analysis, whether it's for golf, NBA, NFL, or even more, make sure to check out my channel because I have a ton of content for you guys. If we take a look at what I do other than video content, I also have a Patreon page where I both post my projections for every single player for all the golf tournaments that we see. Obviously for every single PGA Tour event. I also do it for a few of the larger European Tour events here and there, and I will have it this week for the Olympics. So my projections for all 60 players, my ownership projections, some game theory notes, all of that, just $1. So make sure to join. It's a really good value at this point, and you get all of my picks for this week. If we take a look at how we've done over the last 4 weeks in terms of our custom modeling and how we've done on this channel, we've done excellent. We've gone 20 of our 24 core picks through the cut over the last 4 events. We've also gone 20 of our 24 value picks through the cut. That's very consistent. We've obviously found a lot of cut makers, but on top of being consistent, we've also found a lot of top end upside. We have hit on 2 of the last 4 winners on tour, those being Cam Davis and Lucas Glover a few weeks back. We've also done very well in the top 5 in prop market. Notably, last week we touted Keith Mitchell. He was my diamond in the rough last week. Somebody actually touted it as a pick to win. He ended up finishing top 5 at $6,800. I had him on a top 5 bet. I had him for some jock market stocks if you guys play that type of DFS. Ended up doing really well there. And he also helped me take down quite a few dollars in DraftKings. So hopefully you guys tailed that pick. We also had Charles Schwartzel last week. We had Jonathan Vegas, both of those guys top 5. We also had Mito Pereira and Gary Woodland as well. All of those guys ended up finishing top 10, and overall was a very solid week for analysis, as it has been for the last 4 weeks as well. So we're obviously looking to build on that momentum for this week's Olympics, and without further ado, let's hop into the preview for this week's event. So for this week's event, if you guys haven't seen, like I mentioned before, we do have Bryson and John Rahm already withdrawn and tested positive for COVID. So make sure they're out of your lineups. But like I said before, replacing Bryson for Team America is Patrick Reed. So great to see you there. He's definitely going to be somebody I consider for DraftKings later on. But in total, we have 60 golfers in the field, and it is the strongest Olympic field that we've ever seen, even with some of the withdrawals that we've had, like Rahm and Bryson. The scoring is going to be a typical stroke play event, what we're used to seeing at majors for the PGA Tour, European Tour, standard stroke play event, and it's going to have 3 ceremonial placements like any Olympic event. Obviously a gold medal, silver, and bronze, and there's not going to be any payouts for the golfers this week. So they're playing for pride this week. They are playing for those top 3 spots, which should add to a different dynamic than we're used to seeing at a normal PGA Tour event. It is also a no-cut event, so all 60 golfers will play all 4 rounds for the golf tournament. And again, there's not going to be playing for money. There's going to be a lot more incentive to play aggressively to try and go for one of those top 3 spots. There's also going to be a lot less of a penalty to have a bad tournament. If they go out, they shoot horrible, they finish in dead last place. First of all, it doesn't affect any of their placement on the PGA Tour. They also weren't going to win any money anyway, so there's not any type of financial pressure. The only pressure that they will have will be from a sense of national pride. And you're more looking at pressure for people like Hideki, who's obviously in his home country of Japan. Some of the higher end players like Rory McIlroy, some of the Americans, they're going to be feeling a lot of pressure. But some of those mid-tier players, some of those guys further down the board, they are going to be playing very, very free golf this week. As a result, I expect some of them to be very aggressive, and I expect some of the guys further down the board, at least 2 or 3 of them, to finish in the top 5. Players that are able to play freely, that are play aggressively. We've seen it time and time again, almost every single week on tour. There's a surprise guy up there on the board. Last week, that was Keith Mitchell for me. He was somebody who had come in horrible form. He had nothing to lose. He still has his tour card after this year because of his win at the Honda Classic. So he went out and he freewheeled it. He hit driver on every single hole. He led the field in shots gained off the tee. And I'm looking for guys like that this week at the Olympics. As for the Americans, we have Xander Schauffele. He lived in Japan for a good portion of his life. A lot of people don't know this about him. He speaks fluent Japanese. At first, he had said that he wasn't going to perform in the Japan Olympics, which for me was mind-blowing. He's from America. It was his first time going to be able to represent America, and it was in a place that he had lived for a good portion of his life. So it was surprising at first. I'm really glad he decided to show up. He has familiarity on Japanese golf courses. He has familiarity in the area. I'm sure it's going to feel like he's coming home to a certain extent, and I look for him to have a very big week. We also have Justin Thomas, Patrick Reed. He's coming in for Bryson DeChambeau, and of course our most recent major winner, Colin Morikawa. So we've got the best of the best teeing it up for America, and one of them is going to medal, in my opinion, almost for sure. Let's get Rory McIlroy, Hideki, like I mentioned. We got Victor Hovland, we have Paul Casey, Sungjae Im, and even Paul Casey, to just name a few of the notables. Of course, we're going to see some guys that we've never seen before for some of the smaller countries. Some people that we're used to seeing on the PGA Tour as well, representing some of the smaller countries like Puerto Rico. We get to see Rafael Campos. It was actually one of my picks last week, believe it or not. And overall, there's going to be a very fun mix of top-end talent. Some guys that have a lot to play for, like the South Koreans, as well as some guys that we just haven't seen before that it'll be nice to see. So I'm looking for a very fun event, a very dynamic event, and overall something that is a little bit different than we're used to seeing for a normal week. And now for the course breakdown. Excuse my pronunciation of this country club, but say good luck with you. Kasumigaseki. We're going to try one more time. Kasumigaseki Country Club, the East Course in Japan. That is the last time I will try to say it. It's a par 71 at 7,466 yards, which is extremely long for par 71. This was designed back in 1929, very, very long time ago, had Japanese designers, but very notably has been redesigned and almost completely redone by both Tom and his brother, the Fazio brothers, sorry. It is also a bent grass in terms of the rough, the fairways, and the greens in terms of grass type. And it's very typical of a Midwestern course. We've seen bent grass 5 of the last 6 weeks on tour, even over at the Open Championship. So it's something that players are very used to. Not anything like Paspalum or one of those weird grass types like they see once a year or anything like that. It is going to be a very typical grass type. Water hazards, there's only going to be one in play, and that is on hole 18. It is a water hazard just in front of the green to the right. Other than that, there are no water hazards, quote unquote, in play. While there are on the golf course, most of the water hazards are right next to tee boxes. They make no sense. Like, what's the point of putting a water hazard next to a tee box? As not my design, was not my choice, obviously. But there's only going to be one water hazard in play. The other ones, I guess, are for aesthetic, to look nice. Not something that I would do. If we look at the bunkers, it's about tour average in terms of bunkers. They do not have severe faces. They're more resort style bunkers, what we're used to seeing in America. And from what I've gathered watching the interviews after today's practice rounds from some of the Olympians, especially the Americans, they said it looks like an American golf course. It looks like it was taken right out of Ohio, right out of like Michigan or something like that. Very typical of the courses that we've seen over the last month. And to be honest, that was very surprising for me. Obviously, the course is in Japan, but it's not as surprising when we consider this is a very high-end course in Japan. This is a course that's very exclusive. They didn't even allow women to play at the golf course for an extremely long time. It's a very like traditionalist golf course where Tom Fazio came over and brought American golf to Japan. It's like you said, it's very traditional. It's gone comparisons from some of the players to Firestone, which is up there in Ohio. It's a relatively long course. There's a lot of long par 5s, 600-yard par 5s. There's a lot of really long par 3s as well, measuring over 200 yards. They have very undulated greens. Again, that's very typical of a Fazio design. And overall, it's going to look a lot like a regular PGA Tour stop. Obviously, it's going to be a longer PGA Tour stop at almost 7,500 yards for a par 71. It's also going to demand precision as well. Tom Fazio has very difficult greens to green. He also has very tiered greens where if you miss in the wrong spot, you're often running off into a bunker or a chipping area. So overall, I expect the course to have relative teeth. I think it's going to score a little bit higher than we're used to seeing at a PGA Tour event. And by higher, I mean closer to even par rather than minus 20. And I expect it to look a lot like a major championship. I mean, obviously, it's only a 60-man field. It's a no-cut event. But I'm expecting the course to play at a similar difficulty to something like a PGA championship or maybe even a relatively easy U.S. Open. And now for my top 3 key metrics. These are going to be my top 3 metrics I use for my custom modeling this week. I like to let you guys into my process a little bit so that you guys understand why I pick some of the plays that I do at a golf course like this. So coming in at number 3, we have shots gained putting, specifically on bent grass. With any golf tournament, putts are going to have to go down for you to contend. You can be one of the best ball strikers in the entire world. If you don't have the putter that week, you're probably not going to get the job done. But this week at the Olympics is going to be even more important, especially with your lag putting. Like I mentioned, the greens are tiered, which means that there's huge slopes on them. There's a lot of drop-offs. If you miss the iron shot at the wrong place, you're hitting up a steep slope or down a steep slope. So as a result, having the ability to lag putt, get down in 2 rather than 3 is going to be a huge advantage at the Olympics. On top of that, though, you also have very, very consistent bent grass greens. Bent grass is something that players are used to seeing about 2 out of every 3 weeks on tour, especially at this time of year. And we have a lot of putting specialists that do really well on the surface. It tends to run a little bit slower than other surfaces that they're used to seeing. So as a result, some of the worst putters on tour actually get a little bit of a boost on this surface. It's a little bit similar to the POA surface. POA helps putters that aren't as good because it's a little bit more inconsistent. They tend to get a little bit more lucky on that surface. But with bent grass, it's because they're able to be a little bit more aggressive and get away with it. Some of the better putters on tour that like to use dying speed, people like Bubba Watson, I can't really think of any other ones that come to mind right off the top of my head, but people that use that dying speed tend to struggle on these greens. It's because they have a harder time getting into the hole. Even though the greens are very consistent, they have to be a little bit more aggressive than they want to. So I'm looking at some of those putting splits, especially on the bent grass surface. And like I mentioned before, you're really looking for people to avoid 3 putts, make their fair share of birdies when they can. So that's why it comes in at number 3. For my number 2 key stat this week, we have driving distance, which is a little bit atypical for my analysis. I usually like to focus a little bit more on accuracy, but at a course that's almost 7,500 yards and just a par 71, distance is undoubtedly going to play a huge factor in my analysis. My comparison course for this week, like I mentioned before, was Firestone. If we take a look at my analysis for Firestone Country Club, my number 1 key stat is routinely driving distance. We saw Tiger Woods dominate at that golf course while it was on the PGA Tour. We saw him win the PGA Championship there multiple times. And a lot of that had to do with his distance. He was much longer than his peers at that time. He had much less of a penalty out of the rough as well. He was able to use his strength to hit the ball out of that. And I expect there to be a huge advantage with that this week as well. Like I mentioned before, there's routinely 200-yard plus approaches. You have a lot of them into the par 3s. You have 600-plus yard par 5s. So obviously you're going to have to be very good with your long irons or even your fairway woods. And distance isn't unique to one club. This is something I always like to mention when it comes to distance and the distance debate. There's a lot of people consider distance off the tee. How much closer are you going to be on your approaches, etc., etc. Well, distance bleeds down into your irons, it bleeds down into your wedges, and you hit shorter clubs no matter the course, no matter the shot that you're hitting. Whenever you're hitting shorter irons into greens, you have less side-to-side dispersion. Longer the iron, the more you're able to hook it or slice it. But on top of that, you also have much better dispersion when it comes to your spin. If you're using a longer iron, it's much harder to stop a golf ball. It's harder to apply spin to it. If you're using something like an 8-iron or a 9-iron, it's very easy to apply spin to a golf ball. Doing so makes golfers much more precise. It also allows them to hold tiered greens much more easily, which is exactly what they're going to be seeing this week at the Olympics. So I think it's going to be a prerequisite for success this week. I think you're absolutely going to have distance off the tee to compete. So that's why it comes in at my number 2 key stat. And finally, for number 1, we have shots gained approach. There's going to be a huge emphasis on the 200-plus yard range. Like I was mentioning before, there's going to be a lot of shots in that range on the par 3s and par 5s. But I'm also going to be narrowing down to the 100 to 125 yard range. A lot of this has to do with some of the shorter par 4s on the course. Because it is 7,500 yards, because we have so many 200-plus yard par 3s and 600-plus yard par 5s, there has to be some short holes to compensate for that. As a result, we have 5 par 4s under 400 yards. On those holes, players are going to likely hit iron off the tee, wedge into the greens. So as a result, that range is going to be overrepresented this week as well. Shots gained approach, if you guys are been to my channel for a while now, is a key or a staple of my analysis. It's the most correlated stat to success for any golf tournament. It really doesn't matter how it plays. Making sure you can put yourself in a position to make birdies is always going to be the most important stat to go off of. And now that we're at a course in Japan that we haven't seen before, we haven't seen it in professional play before, we absolutely have to bank off what we know works. And what we know works is shots gained approach. And this week I think it's going to be extremely important due to the tiered greens as well. If we take a look at the average proximity on tour in terms of an average iron player, they're hitting the ball to about 23 feet on average. Now, at this golf course, 23-foot proximity is going to be on the wrong tier of green. You're going to be putting up a huge slope, putting down a huge slope, and there's going to be a lot of 3 putts from the average proximity range. Now, remember that. So the average player this week is going to have plenty of 3 putts. They're going to be putting themselves in a pretty bad situation. If we take a look at some of the elite iron players, though, they average 13 to 16 foot of proximity. The guys that are over 0.7 shots gained approach, those are the kind of numbers that they're putting up. Those players are going to be likely on the correct tier about 80 to 90% of the time. That is a huge difference. Those guys are going to have much less 3 putts. They're also going to make much more birdies. And I think the real distinguishing factor this week is going to be that elite iron play. I think even just above average iron play is not going to get it done. Hitting it to 20 feet on average just isn't going to get you on the correct tier. But those that go out, gain 5 or 6 strokes on approach this week, are definitely going to have that advantage. I think it's going to be the best iron player that wins this week. Obviously, you still got to make some putts. But people like Victor Hovland, Colin Morikawa, some of those iron specialists are definitely going to be interesting for me when it comes to my player picks. That's all I've got for my key stats, guys. That's all I've got for this week's research video for the 2021 Olympic Games. I'm going to have my top 6 golfers to target on DraftKings for the Olympics out in just a few hours on my YouTube channel. Those will be my top 6 plays, one pick in each pricing tier for the event. So make sure to stay tuned for that and to see those top plays. Let me know in the comments who you think the winning score, what you think the winning score is going to be this week for a chance to win a free month of my Patreon projections. I think it's going to be somewhere around 3 or 4 under par. Make sure to put a projection down in the comments there. If you guys end up getting it right, you'll win a free month of those projections. As always, make sure to like and subscribe if you guys enjoy the content. It really helps me out with growing the channel. It also makes sure that you guys are able to catch my content as soon as I post it. So it's a win-win. Make sure to go ahead and do that. Good luck with your DFS lineups this week. Let's win some cash on DraftKings. I think there's a lot of potential, especially with these casuals. And again, make sure to leave any comments if you guys have any questions. See you guys later on today.